Hello and welcome to the video. I'm up here again. Yes, it's one of those videos. I'm talking to somebody else who actually knows far more than I do about this particular subject. This down here is Simeon. Say hello.
Hello.
Simeon is one of the developers for ExpressLRS. And as you may have seen, version 3.0 has just gone into release candidate. And I'm sure all the guys out there who like to run the latest and greatest and find all the features in new code will be downloading it and having a go. It's not quite there yet for the rest of us pilots, but I'm making this video because there's some fantastic new features in ExpressLRS version 3.0. Couple of things that I particularly have been very, very interested as a fixed wing pilot to get my hands on. Now, what I'll do is I'll put timecodes down below. So if you want to jump to a particular question or particular answer or feature, it's all signposted down there. So go and check that out. I'll put links as well to the project and other things. But if you're interested in ExpressLRS and what's new in version 3.0, you've come to the right place. So let's go through the list. There is a lot to cover. So what we'll do, I think we'll try and keep it reasonably high level. There's lots of information in the project in kind of for much more detail. But the first thing we'll talk about is the fact that we now have FLRC modes, don't we?
Yes, so these FLRC modes are for the people that want the most extreme, most high-performance radio link for racing or other high latency sensitive applications. And with this, we have pushed the boundary even more by allowing people to run at 1000 Hertz, or for people that want more consistent frames, then we have the new system where we can double the frames and give you a bit of a lower rate, but a more consistent rate overall.
So I'm guessing this is going to reduce latency again. In terms of distance and things like that, I mean, there are other things later on about dynamic power and stuff we'll talk about. Does FLRC contribute towards better range or better signals within the areas that we'll be flying in?
Depending, again, on the packet rate picking, obviously, if you're going to run 1000 Hertz, then you're not going to fly very far. On the more standard packet rates, you're looking at, depending on the RF environment, at very close performance to LoRa, or in some cases even better.
Fantastic. That's good news. We also get LBT modes for those of us in the EU, 2.4 only. I'm guessing that's going to be certified at some point by somebody, but it does mean that if you're in the EU and you want to run listen before talk, which is what LBT stands for, then there is a version that supports it. However, for the rest of the world that's outside Europe, you don't have to worry about that anyway, but it's here if you need it. Now, can we go back to the duplicate send modes again? Because that's called DVDA, is it?
Yes, quite a cheeky name for that one. And, well, they're basically us trying to toy around with the idea of having a more consistent and more jitter-free control link, especially for those pilots that need the absolute frame-perfect turns and times on the track, as well as for other scenarios where you don't want to miss a frame or have a chance of maybe not catching the right stick input.
Right. So this allows you to run at the highest speed in terms of the link, but that it's sending each packet twice. Is that what this one is?
Yes, that's exactly what this one is.
Right. So it's kind of like giving you two chances on the receiver to hear the information. So if it was just flying behind the flag as you've sent the first one, hopefully it's cleared the flag by the time you send the second one, it gets it. So I guess very good for racing and close in where, like you say, low latency is really important, but you also don't want to lose the quad. Talking about diversity, nice segue. There's the option now in the hardware spec for true diversity receivers this time around, isn't it? This is something that's quite new.
Since the start of 2.0, we've been toying out with the idea of having two transceivers on a receiver as well as on the transmitter, so that you have a much better chance of being able to receive the signal, since on a antenna-based diversity, you have to either listen to one of the antennas or the other, and you have no idea which one is better. But with true diversity, you can listen to both of them at the same time and just pick the best one out of them, of the 2 or 3 that you have.
So until now, then, the receivers that we've seen that have multiple antennas, that's just been antenna diversity, has it?
Yeah, it's essentially using a antenna switcher to switch between one or the other.
Fantastic. That's good stuff. Now, the next mode is something called a lone model. Now, this is really interesting. It's for those pilots. If you remember when you're binding, there's 2 ways to do it. You can either do that thing where you power the receiver 3 times and put it into bind mode if you're not using a passphrase, or you set a passphrase, like a password, essentially, on your transmitter and on the receiver. And if the password is the same, they just kind of talk to each other. That makes it a little bit tricky because you'd kind of have to give that passcode to somebody at the field if you wanted to loan them a quad, if you were feeling particularly nice, or vice versa, if they were lending you a quad or a model to try, then potentially you're going to have to tell you what the passcode is. And there might be some flashing of firmware, which is how the passphrase has normally been changed. That's all changed in 3.0. We can now let other people try our ExpressLRS models without having to give away secrets.
Essentially, this is for people, again, to temporarily loan out their models and give people temporary access to fly your quads, especially if you feel generous. As well as for maybe fixed-wing pilots that may want to give someone a go with flying their plane and teaching them how to do some basic things.
So how does it work then? Is it something that, I'm guessing it's done through the Lua script?
Yes, so in the Lua script there is going to be a loan model button that's going to be available on the receiver. And once that mode is initiated, the person that you are lending the model to can hit bind in the Lua, and then it's going to temporarily bind to their transmitter. And until they release the lease on that quad, it's going to be in their temporary possession.
Fantastic. Or you go into the Lua script and kind of cancel the loan model feature. That's a really nice one. Next one is probably going to upset SpeedyBee, because now you guys, bearing in mind we've had Wi-Fi on all of the ExpressLRS kit for ages, and I've done videos where I'll put a link down below to this one where we talked about how you set up PWM outputs on receivers, and Wi-Fi has been a big part of ExpressLRS configuration for a very long time. And it's kind of obvious, I guess, now you've done it, but then it always is after the fact, isn't it? That, well, if it's talking Wi-Fi already, why can't we talk Wi-Fi to the flight controller it's connected to? Why can't we then use the configurator for Betaflight and do everything wirelessly? And you've basically done that now for 3.0.
Yeah, essentially that was one of the ideas that we were toying around with. So everyone hates wires, everyone hates plugging things in and plugging things out to do things. So we thought, hey, we have all this Wi-Fi capable hardware. Why not try to do a wireless connection to the configurator and do everything without having to plug in a USB, especially for things like whoops or pre-builds that may have that USB port tucked in very deep into the frame, and you may have to disassemble it.
Yep, or you have to find the adapter to plug into the USB port to plug your cable into when you haven't got the adapter with you. So, I love that idea. I think that's such a smart way to use that Wi-Fi stuff that's been in ExpressLRS for a long time. Next one is quite a big one, is unified targets. Now, the way it's worked historically is when you flash your, and loads of us have done videos on this, you have your ELRS configurator, you tell it, the target that you want, and you do all the stuff, and then it kind of compiles the target with all of your settings live on the screen. It looks like you're in the Matrix. All this text flies up, and then eventually it flashes it. You're trying to make this a little bit simpler for some pilots, aren't you now?
Yeah, so it's also very helpful for us to maintain new targets, especially once new manufacturers come on board and start making their own hardware, so that we don't have to add a new target to the configurator and make the list bigger and bigger each time. This will allow basically to use a generic target that's supported by a lot of hardware, and since most of the hardware is more or less the same with some differences, This is going to also allow us to do pre-built firmwares that will only need small modifications. For example, to add in the bind phrase, your Wi-Fi access point, name and password, and some other settings, and then just adjust the generic firmware and then immediately flash it to the hardware. Yeah, but for our first release candidate, the configurator is not ready just yet for being able to do this unified modifications of the firmware. So people that are going to flash to RC1 and potential other RCs are still going to have to actually do it the old-fashioned way.
Fantastic. Again, we are recording this in advance of the release candidate coming out. So all of this information is subject to change. It is for the release candidate. This is all stuff that is in the weeds right now. So, what ends up, who knows? So the next one is integrated video transmitter. When I saw this, I thought of the TBS, the 69 module that has a receiver and a VTX in one little box.
Yeah, so this is very similar to that, only instead of having separate dedicated hardware for the video transmitter and the radio receiver, this is all controlled by a central chip that controls both the receiver side and the VTX side. So especially for people that are running microquads, toothpicks, whoops, and other models that are super tiny and have very small spaces, this is going to be absolutely perfect because it combines two components into one.
So are you aware of any hardware vendors that are working on this at the moment? You don't have to mention names, but I know this is a spec you guys have created. Are any of the hardware guys working on a version of this to ship?
Yeah, we have a couple of manufacturers that are already working on prototypes and preparing to do the initial versions of this.
Fantastic. I will keep my eyes open. We can probably guess who those manufacturers are, but we won't no names, no pack drill. So the next one then is one that I am incredibly happy about, because what you've just done is you finally give me what I've been wanting since ExpressLRS wasn't before version 1.0. For those of you that are watching, if you are a fixed wing pilot, you probably don't care about this. Historically, only the first 4 channels are full resolution channels with the standard 1000, 2000 microsecond pulses. Channel 5 has always been binary for the arming switch, and then the other channels had several different modes, including a wide mode, which can 128 positions. Now, that was okay for most things, but for fixed wing pilots who would use those auxiliary channels for control surfaces, although some of us have tried it, having full resolution would be amazing. And now we have it. So can we talk a little bit about this? Because for us fixed wing guys, this is major news.
Yes, so the full resolution mode is one that allows you to run, as the name implies, full resolution on absolutely all the channels, albeit at a much lower rate than the traditional, more slimmer version of the control link. So currently the main version that we're looking at is 333 Hertz for the full resolution channel rate, just for 2.4 for now, because we cannot do a lot of testing on 868 at the moment.
So how many channels is that? Is that 12?
Yes, it is all 12 channels.
Including channel 5?
Well, including channel 5, but it has a caveat.
What's the caveat? Come on, let's have it. What's the caveat?
That it still has to be high in order for the optimization of the link to be active. So, like locking the Lua and other neat things.
Channel 5 goes high when you have your throttle, you take off your throttle hold or your throttle cut, is probably how I would do it as a fixed wing pilot. And then as soon as that happens, the link is on full speed. But that is amazing news. I'm so happy about that. And I will be testing that. I've got some of the PWM receivers here. So that is big news. Next one then, quickly, is Lua configuration for receivers is here. Receivers have been able to be configured by the Wi-Fi stuff, and that will probably continue to be the best way to do it because all the access stuff will be there. But that does mean that if we're at the field and we haven't got a laptop with us and we want to change something or tweak something, then that would mean historically you'd have been stuck. However, now with the Lua script, we can now change things. What kind of things can we change?
Initially, there isn't going to be a lot of changes that are allowed to receivers. It's going to be mainly things like the PWM values or the low model thing that I was mentioning before, and a couple of other very small details that we're still ironing out.
Right. Hopefully that will continue to develop so we can do things like the channel ordering, PWM, the fail-safe values, all that stuff will kind of be in there in the fullness of time. Because then it would mean at the field, if you want to tweak something, you can do it without having to use a laptop, which would be great, particularly with the radios we've got now. Next one is an interesting one. I believe this one took you guys a lot of hard work and thinking to figure out. This is the signal to noise ratio, SNR, power-based stuff. So as the signal to noise ratio, which is basically the noise that's in the environment, gets higher, then the power of the system can be dynamically increased to make sure that you maintain the link. This is some quite clever stuff.
Yeah, so the issue was that we've had the link come up to full power for absolutely no reason, or for a very small blip in the signal to noise ratio from different environmental things. And we didn't have a reliable way to consistently test this. But thankfully, through pretty much trial and error, we finally got it out, and we think it's going to be a lot more effective than the old way of using dynamic power.
Fantastic. For those of you who are struggling to figure out what this means, it's like if you're having a conversation with somebody stood outside your house, and then somebody starts a pneumatic drill 20 feet away, you naturally have to then start shouting in order for the other person to hear you. It's basically exactly that, but for the radio link. So it's actually very clever stuff. We also get to change PWM output frequencies, which is great because it means those of us who, again, are fixed wing flyers with analog and digital servos and those kind of things, we can now set the PWM output to match the kit that we have in the plane.
Yeah, essentially now people are going to be able to set per output channel. So that's not to be confused with the remote control channels. These are the individual channels on a PWM receiver. You can set to different frequencies based on different kind of servers that you have, or if you have an ESC and that needing a lower frequency or a higher frequency depending on what protocol it uses.
You see, that's quite clever because a lot of systems that I've played with historically have, either you have a 50 hertz setting and that's the setting for all the outputs, or 100 or 110 or 120 hertz, and that's for everything. This will allow us to say, well, high-speed servos can be run at high speed, but maybe you have a gimbal or something else that needs a lower speed. You can set that individually too. Standard telemetry. So there's some changes to the telemetry as well now. So things like the telemetry only starts when things are armed. What's all this about?
So this is more for people that want to, for example, use telemetry to set up their or tweak their Betaflight configs, or maybe some other tweaks to the Lua configs. And then they don't want the telemetry or the sync packets to be transmitted so that the link is even more stable and consistent. So again, this is mostly for racers. Now you're going to have the ability to turn off all these extra packets the moment you arm the quad or model.
And the last one then we'll talk about for this is there are more changes and improvements to the OLED screens that are in a lot of the radio modules themselves. What kind of new stuff have we got? So
up until now, we had the most basic and most important of the options being able to be tweaked from the OLED displays as well as the color displays. But now we've added all the capabilities of the Lua scripts into the display menus as well. So things like engaging Wi-Fi updates for the backpack and the receiver and the video receiver backpack, as well as changing things like the VTX administrator, so setting your frequency, channel, band, other things like that, as well as control over the fan and a couple of other things.
Fantastic. So that's not everything that is in the update. That's just a little list that we've come up with to kind of give you a flavor of some of the highlights of the new stuff that's coming in ExpressLRS version 3.0. Again, at the moment, release candidate 1 is out. There's usually several release candidates before it goes gold and gets released. But I wanted to do this video, and thank you again to Simeon for the time to have this chat, to kind of let you know that it was about, because lots of us have been waiting particularly for things like the PWM stuff for full resolution channels and the ability to change the speed for servos for fixed wing for quite a while, and it is absolutely here. There's only one thing that isn't on this list, and it's SBUS. Any comment on that before we finish?
We're still adamant about SBUS, that it being an ancient protocol that should finally be let go by everyone.
So if you have any older stuff that only talks SBUS, then ExpressLRS isn't going to be for you. But for the rest of us, ExpressLRS continues to get better and better. So thank you again, everyone, for watching and listening. Again, details down below if you want to go and find a little bit more about this out. But looking forward to trying out 3.0 here in some of my fixed wing stuff. Thank you for spending your time today watching that video. You can find me in all the usual places on social media, and if you're trying to learn about a subject, then check out the playlist. All of my videos are organized into easy to follow playlists that, if you're trying to learn a topic, will take you from the basics right the way through to some pretty advanced stuff.